A wind off the North Atlantic cuts through wool and leather like a blade. The ground is slick with rain. Breath turns to pale mist in the dark. Ahead, shapes move. Men with spears, axes, shields, waiting for the first mistake, the first hesitation, the first opening. In this kind of fight, fear is not a feeling. Fear is a physical limit. A tightening throat, shaking hands, narrowed vision, the instinct to step back. And yet, the medieval North remembered warriors who do the opposite. Old Norse sources describe berserkers as fighters who surge forward with a kind of violent trance, shivering and chattering teeth at first, then faces flushed, pain seemingly distant, strength rising, restraint vanishing. Some accounts claim they bite their shields, howl like animals, and strike with such force that opponents fall in one blow. When the trance ends, the stories say the body crashes. Weakness, exhaustion, emotional numbness that can last for days. How can a human body do that without breaking? But the Vikings had a system. Not a single trick, not a single mystical secret. An entire survival toolkit for pushing the body past fear, past pain, and sometimes past ordinary consciousness. Part training, part ritual, part social engineering, and possibly, according to some research, part pharmacology. To understand what berserker survival technique really means, the first step is to separate three layers that often get tangled together. What the sources describe, what the archaeology proves, and what biology makes plausible. The sources, poems and sagas written down centuries after the earliest Viking raids, preserve a cultural memory of fighters who behave abnormally in combat. That memory is vivid, but it is not a laboratory report. The archaeology, graves, tools, settlements does not label a skeleton berserker. It shows what people owned, what they ate, what they carried, and what they considered important enough to bury. Biology, meanwhile, provides a hard boundary. The nervous system can only produce certain kinds of altered states, and those states come with recognizable patterns. Adrenaline surges, stress tremors, dissociation, delirium, intoxication, and recovery crashes. Here is where it gets interesting. The berserker story is not a tale about being fearless. It is a tale about being functional inside fear. Viking survival, in war as in winter, is often about managing limits, calories, heat, fatigue, panic, pain, blood loss, and the time it takes for help to arrive. In Viking Age Scandinavia, survival is never abstract. Cold kills quietly. Hunger kills slowly. Violence kills suddenly. And raiding culture, long voyages, uncertain landfalls, hostile shores, demands a kind of mental readiness that cannot be improvised in the moment. A berserker, as portrayed in the literature, looks like an extreme specialization for a specific problem, breaking an enemy's will at close range. The first method in that system is the simplest and the most universal. It is controlled arousal. In modern terms, it is the stress response weaponized. When the brain detects lethal threat, it floods the body with stress hormones that raise heart rate, increase blood flow to muscles, and prioritize gross power over fine control. Attention locks onto danger. Pain can temporarily dim. Blood can keep moving even when injured. In the short term, this response is adaptive. It exists because it keeps organisms alive long enough to fight or flee. All descriptions of Berserkergang often begin with physical symptoms, chills, shaking, teeth chattering. That looks like the body's ramp up, an overclocking phase where the nervous system pushes circulation, breathing, and muscle readiness beyond resting function. Then comes the break, rage, violence, a forward drive that feels unstoppable to witnesses. And then, crucially, the crash, fatigue and dullness afterward. The crash is what makes the story believable, because that is the price of extreme arousal. The body borrows energy and pays it back with interest. This is not romantic. It is costly, and it is controllable only up to a point. So why would a society encourage it? Because on a battlefield, fear is contagious. A shield wall survives when it stays coherent. A line breaks when individuals hesitate. A fighter who appears immune to fear can become a psychological weapon, not only against enemies, but also as an anchor for allies who might otherwise freeze. The system likely begins long before combat. Ritualized priming can push fighters into a predictable state. Repetitive chanting, synchronized movement, rhythmic breathing, and group noise are not decorative. They are neurological tools. They narrow attention, drown out internal doubt, and create a shared tempo. In such conditions, the individual brain stops calculating alone and starts moving with the group. But there is more. The second method goes beyond stress and ritual and steps into chemistry, where the popular mushroom berserker idea lives, and where factual accuracy demands careful wording. It is widely repeated that berserkers used fly agaric mushrooms. Scientists do confirm that the fly agaric mushroom contains psychoactive compounds capable of producing delirium, hallucinations, altered perception, and dangerous intoxication. Those effects are real and documented. What is not confirmed is that Viking berserkers reliably used fly agaric as their trigger. That distinction changes the entire story. The mushroom is chemically powerful. The historical claim is uncertain. So the responsible question is not, did they definitely use mushrooms? The responsible question is, what substances could produce the behaviors described in the sources? And what evidence exists that those substances were available in Viking Age Scandinavia? This is where scholarly debate becomes more revealing than certainty. One line of research argues that fly agaric does not consistently produce the specific feature most associated with berserkers: aggressive combat rage. Fly agaric can intoxicate, it can confuse, it can sedate or agitate. But rage is not its most predictable signature. Another line of research points to a different candidate: henbane, a poisonous plant in the nightshade family. Henbane contains tropane alkaloids that can cause delirium, confusion, impaired recognition, hallucinations, and, importantly, aggressiveness and combative behavior in toxic doses. In other words, it can produce a state where a person is awake, mobile, and violent, but detached from normal judgment and normal social recognition. That fits the ugly side of berserker accounts: inability to distinguish friend from foe, reckless exposure to danger, and erratic behavior that communities might fear even after battle ends. It also fits the reported hangover-like after effects that linger for days. Unlike fly agaric, which grows in a specific ecological relationship with trees, henbane can grow as a weed in disturbed ground, near settlements, paths, and cultivated land. That matters for practical access. A survival system does not rely on a rare ingredient unless supply is consistent. But it gets even more grounded. Archaeology shows that henbane existed in Viking Age contexts. Seeds identified as henbane have been found in at least one well-known burial context in Denmark, carried in a small pouch. Museums interpret this as evidence that people knew the plant and valued it enough to keep it close, possibly for ritual, medicine, or controlled intoxication. This does not prove berserkers used it. It proves the substance was within the Viking toolkit. So what does this mean in practical terms? If a berserker state is chemically induced, it is not a clean battle drug. It is a risky manipulation of the nervous system. Tropane alkaloids can cause dry mouth, dilated pupils, overheating, confusion, and a delirium that can become dangerous to everyone nearby. Fly agaric compounds can cause altered consciousness that swings between excitation and depression. Either way, the margin between useful and fatal can be thin, especially without standardized dosing. That is why a drug theory, if true, would likely operate inside a broader control structure. Ritual supervision, experienced preparation, and social rules about when and who uses it. A society does not survive by randomly poisoning its own fighters. If intoxicants played a role, they likely did so in controlled contexts, select individuals, specific moments, and a cultural framework that interpreted the symptoms as meaningful rather than merely sick. And here is the real survival lesson. The berserker advantage is not just rage, it is pain suppression. Pain is a warning system. It forces a body to protect itself. In combat, pain can sabotage performance. If a fighter feels less pain, whether through stress hormones, dissociation, alcohol, or toxic delirium, he may continue advancing even after being cut. Witnesses interpret that as invulnerability. In reality, it is a damaged body running on borrowed neurological time. Some accounts claim berserkers did not respond to edged weapons or fire, but could be killed with clubs. That kind of detail may be mythic embellishment, but it also suggests observers noticed something specific. Cutting injuries did not immediately stop them. Blunt force trauma, however, can shut down the nervous system by concussion, broken ribs, collapsed lungs, or internal bleeding. Damage that even a pain-blunted fighter cannot ignore for long. Whether or not the detail is literally true, the logic behind it is anatomically plausible. The third method in the berserker system is equipment minimalism paired with mobility, and the psychological effect it creates. Some descriptions imply berserkers fight with reduced armor, sometimes wearing animal skins or appearing bare-chested. Not every source agrees, and the details vary. But if some fighters did reduce armor, it would increase risk. Why would anyone do that? Because it changes movement and identity. Armor protects, but it also restricts. A fighter who expects to be the spear point, breaking formations, rushing gaps, may value speed and endurance over maximum protection. More importantly, the visual message of apparent fearlessness can destabilize an opponent. A man who charges without flinching communicates either insanity or absolute confidence. Both are psychologically corrosive to enemies who still feel normal fear. In survival terms, this is intimidation as a weapon. Intimidation reduces the enemy's willingness to hold ground. It turns a fight into a collapse rather than a contest of equal skill. But intimidation alone cannot keep a body functional in the cold, wet north. That leads to a fourth method, one that rarely gets linked to berserkers, but belongs to Viking survival across all contexts: thermal management and energy budgeting. A warrior is a heat engine. Muscles generate heat only if calories are available. Cold exposure drains energy fast, especially when clothing is wet. Viking survival techniques, from layered wool to sheltered camps and controlled fire use, keep bodies ready for sudden effort. A berserker-style sprint into combat after hours of cold waiting is only possible if the body stays warm enough to function. This is where the wider Viking system supports the berserker myth. The berserker is not an isolated freak. He is a product of a society that understands cold, fatigue, and food logistics. Raiding and warfare demand preserved calories, dried fish, smoked meat, salted foods, and fermented dairy where possible. They demand sheltered sleep. They demand tool maintenance. They demand routine. Even the most extreme fighter cannot be extreme every day. Survival is repetition. Now comes the deeper analysis, the why it worked, not just what it was. A berserker state, however achieved, exploits a known principle of human performance. Narrow the mind to a single task, and the body becomes brutally efficient. Complex moral reasoning disappears. Long-term risk assessment disappears. Social inhibition disappears. The fighter becomes a short-term machine optimized for forward violence. This is effective in brief bursts. It is catastrophic as a lifestyle. That may explain another pattern in the sources. Berserkers are sometimes portrayed as socially disruptive, dangerous, difficult to control, even outlawed or marginalized in certain narratives. Whether every story is literal or not, the theme is consistent with what severe intoxication or uncontrolled trance behavior would look like in any society. A man who can enter a violent delirium on command is not merely a weapon, he is also a liability. And that creates a final, more realistic picture. Berserker techniques are survivable only when constrained. The system works only when the community builds boundaries around it. Ritual rules, leadership control, and cultural meaning that channels chaos toward an enemy and away from the group. So what does modern science actually confirm here? It confirms that certain plants and mushrooms associated with berserker theories contain psychoactive compounds capable of producing delirium, altered perception, and dangerous neurological effects. It confirms that anticholinergic plants like henbane can produce confusion, hallucinations, and combative behavior. It confirms that stress physiology can blunt pain and distort perception in life-threatening moments. It confirms that human groups can synchronize emotion and action through ritual, creating predictable altered states without any drug at all. What it does not confirm is a single ingredient recipe, one mushroom, one dose, one guaranteed transformation into a fearless warrior. That is not a weakness in the story. It is the most Viking part of the story. Viking survival is rarely about one solution. It is about layered redundancy, tools, plus knowledge, plus habit, plus risk tolerance. And there is a modern relevance that goes beyond battle. The Berserker legend is an early case study in performance hacking. How cultures attempt to override the body's protective systems for a task that feels necessary. The same principle appears in endurance rides, extreme sports, modern military training, and even emergency response. In every case, the trade-off is identical: short-term performance at the cost of long-term stability. The broader implication is not that berserkers are admirable or monstrous. The broader implication is that humans have always searched for ways to manage fear, pain, and fatigue, and that the line between skill and self-destruction is thinner than most stories admit. The final lesson is a hard one. If drugs played any role in berserker behavior, they were not superpowers. They were controlled poisoning, tolerated because the outcome could be useful in a narrow window. If drugs played no role, the legend still makes sense because stress, ritual, and group psychology can carry people into frightening extremes. Either way, the technique is real in the only way that matters. The nervous system can be pushed into states that look like fearlessness from the outside, while being something far more dangerous on the inside. So when the question returns, Viking Berserkers, the mushroom drug that made them fearless, scientists confirm, the answer lies in a more careful truth. Science confirms that psychoactive substances linked to berserker theories can alter the brain in dramatic, hazardous ways. Historical evidence indicates that Viking Age people knew and carried intoxicating plants. Research suggests that henbane may fit saga symptom patterns better than fly agaric, though certainty remains out of reach. And the sources themselves describe not magic, but a system: ritual priming, stress-driven pain suppression, intimidation tactics, and a culture hardened by cold, scarcity, and violence. In that system, the berserker is not a mythic monster. He is an extreme survival specialist, built from biology, belief, and risk. And in the long shadow of the Viking Age, that may be the most unsettling wisdom of all. Fear can be overridden, but the cost is always paid later.